In this series, we are looking at how to test a application which uses GraphQL to talk to its backend and how we can test it with Cypress, specifically the Cypress Intercept command. In the previous video, we have created a basic test which will load the page and verify that it loads the correct items there. In this video, we're going to create one new test where we are going to create a new item in this application, and we're going to see how we can use Cypress Intercept to reliably check for this activity. So I have the developers console open. I have selected XHR for filtering on the requests I'm going to monitor, and I have used the word GraphQL here so as to only show the GraphQL requests that are being made. Now we're going to create a new item in the first list here. If I was to inspect this, you have this button here. It's this div called create new item. It has a class create item title. That is the button that I'm going to click. Once I click this, I get this input field, and if I inspect that field, I have an input field here that is inside the create item editor. So this is how we're going to identify this. We don't have any good selector, very specific selector for this one. Let's get back to the network element, the tab, and we're going to say, let's give it an item, new item. I'm going to create the item. That creates a GraphQL request here. And this is the headers. Let's make it bigger and let's see what we sent. We sent a query with an operation name create item mutation. This is actually a mutation and it has certain variables inside it. In the variables, you can see there are two items, the list ID, which is this one, the first list, and it has a name called new item. What you get back is an ID from the backend for this new item, its name, its position. With this information, we are going to try to create a test for this. So we come back to the elements tab. We have this list, we have this button, create new item. This is the selector we are going to click. So let's start to write our test. It should create a new item in the list. Now we're going to visit the same page, so I'm going to just copy this line and bring it down. Okay, so I have made a small mistake here. Yeah. Okay, so we copied this one. Now we're going to get this class that is for the create new item button. We're going to click on it. Once we click on it, let's see. It can only be called on the first one. You have 4 elements. So there are 4 of these create new items. And since we are going to click on the first of these, we make it .first. Now we have this selector here. So we can use this to inspect it. This is the input. Inside this a div with the class create item editor. So let's use that one. cy.get this class and inside it an input. So this is how you would create a CSS selector for this. We'll first make sure that it's visible and then type in it, say we're going to give it a new name here. We should ideally give it a random name. For now, let's say we can join the club. And at that stage, we are going to also need to click on the button called create item. Okay, so we now have two of these inputs, and that is an interesting thing. Let's have a look. So the mistake that we did here is this selector has returned us two values. I have a feeling of what this might be. Once I click this and I try to find this input, there are two of them. One has a placeholder and the other one is actually the button itself, which is an input and not a button. That is interesting. So we're going to find the one where you have this placeholder. So let's use this to better find the input that we need to type in, and the second one that we need is a type button. So we're going to find this guy, input with placeholder item name, and in the next one, once we do this, we will do cy.get the same selector as above here, create item editor. This time we have another input, but this input will be type button dot click, and let's see if this test works. Yep, the test has worked. For now I'm going to just delete this guy because we don't really need this one here. We also don't need a new item. The test is now working, but now we need to make sure that the right calls are made, and we actually wait for that call to happen before we check that you have another item, the new item that we created actually appears in the list. For that, we look back at this network call. In this network call, we say its operation name is create item mutation. So we will copy this name, and we are going to make a copy of this piece of code and bring it down here for us. The endpoint that we call is the same. The operation name is going to be different, and so we will alias it differently. And then we are going to wait for this after we have clicked. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to intercept any request that goes to GraphQL endpoint, which has a type method type post. We're going to check if the operation name in the body is create item mutation. Then we give it an alias, and when we do click this, that's when we expect this call to be made, and we wait for this call. The next thing is, before we continue further and actually check that the item actually is created, we need to also wait for this call to happen. What happens is, if you see here, you make a second call. The application makes a second call, which is the home page query request. The reason why it makes this home page query request is once the item has been created, now the state of the application has changed. The application makes another call to the backend asking for whether I have the right items to display. It then renders those. We're going to clear this one. And now what we're going to do is we're going to now check that we have an item with that name. How can we do that? We need to find an item of this name available here. Now, what we can do is we can just find a div that has that text in it. So we can do the cy.contains. First thing first, we will copy this request. We will paste that here, and we are going to wait for this request as well to be made, and we're going to wait for it to have a positive response back. At that stage, we are going to now look for this new list item to be available on our page. So we're going to do cy.contains, and what will it contain? It will contain join the club dot should be visible. And if we run this test, let's have a look. Yep, the test has succeeded. If you look at the details of the test here, you will see it waits here. It actually creates this request that has been intercepted. It makes another post call, which is the one to fetch the latest state of the application, that is the homepage query. And then we find this div to be visible. And so we have a new test in which we create a new item, and we use the Cypress intercept command to ensure that we have made the right requests, and then we can check for the item to be available. In the next video, we are going to look at how to delete an item. That is going to be another mutation, and we will extend these test cases to verify the incoming response from the application itself.